By Royal Features Desk, House of Windsor Chronicles. A historic moment recorded in the Royal Windsor Chronicles. No diamonds, no gold, and yet the moment Princess Catherine walked into Westminster Abbey, the world forgot to breathe. What if the most powerful crown was the one she chose not to wear? Behind every silver leaf of Catherine's headpiece lies a secret of loyalty, of legacy, of quiet rebellion. A moment so deliberate, so hauntingly beautiful, it rewrote the meaning of royalty. Stay till the end, because once you understand what this crown truly symbolizes, you'll never see the monarchy the same way again. It was the question that rippled through every newsroom in London long before the coronation of King Charles III. Would the Princess of Wales wear a crown? In the end, she didn't, and that decision became the most talked about fashion and diplomatic moment of the entire ceremony. From the first planning meetings at Buckingham Palace, it was clear this coronation would not mirror the glittering excess of 1953. King Charles wanted a leaner monarchy, and Queen Camilla wanted something else entirely. The spotlight. Sources close to the royal wardrobe teams quietly confirmed that Her Majesty made a simple but firm request: no other woman would appear in a crown of precious stones on that day. There would be no competing halos of light, no echoes of the late Queen Elizabeth's diamond brilliance. The message was elegant, even reasonable. This was to be Camilla's moment as Queen Consort. But among stylists, courtiers, and watchers of royal symbolism, it was understood for what it really was: a line drawn in gold dust. For Catherine, the Princess of Wales, the choice was delicate. She could have insisted on tradition. Her position as the future queen entitled her to a tiara or even a smaller coronet. Yet, as one senior palace aide later admitted, the princess knew the cameras would look to her, not to Camilla, if she glittered too brightly. So she made a different kind of power move, one grounded in grace, restraint, and a deeper symbolism that no jewel could equal. She would step back from spectacle to step forward into history. The concept came during a quiet meeting at Kensington Palace with designer Sarah Burton of Alexander McQueen and milliner Jess Collett. The challenge: craft a headpiece that looked regal but not rivalrous, ceremonial but not ostentatious, something that would whisper elegance, not shout lineage. On a large sketch pad, Collette drew a circlet of intertwined leaves and blossoms, delicate, metallic, alive. "It should feel like morning dew," she reportedly said, "not midnight diamonds." That single phrase became the philosophy of the design: silver instead of gold, crystals instead of gemstones, lightness instead of weight, and, above all, respect instead of rivalry. Catherine's decision was not born of submission, but of extraordinary self-awareness. She understood the optics of monarchy better than anyone since Elizabeth II herself. To appear beside the new Queen Camilla without competing jewels was to honor the king and diffuse every headline that might read, "The princess outshines the queen." But the deeper tribute was aimed at another figure, the woman whose shadow still stretches across British history, Queen Elizabeth II. In secret design notes, Catherine requested that the headpiece should subtly echo the floral motifs worn by the Queen's maids of honor at her 1953 coronation. 6 decades apart, 2 generations of royal women would share a visual language of service, continuity, and grace. When the big day arrived, the Abbey lights caught the princess's silver and crystal headpiece and turned it into liquid starlight. No diamonds, no emeralds, no relics from the royal vault, yet every camera found her. Viewers around the world gasped, not because she shone the brightest, but because she shone differently. Fashion editors called it the anti-crown. Historians called it a coronation of modern values. Even some palace insiders off the record, of course, admitted that Catherine's restraint made everyone else look dated. She managed to honor the queen, uplift the king, and outclass the Queen Consort, all without a single gem. A royal stylist laughed afterward. That's diplomacy by design. Queen Camilla's camp may have won the battle of the dress code, but Catherine won the narrative. Her headpiece became a metaphor for a new kind of monarchy, one that shines through humility, craftsmanship, and quiet confidence. Behind the silver leaves and crystal petals lay a story of endurance, artistry, and a hint of gentle rebellion. Because sometimes, the brightest jewel in the room is the one that chooses not to sparkle. In a quiet studio tucked away in West London, far from the marble corridors of Buckingham Palace, the sound of a jeweler's hammer tapped against a sheet of silver leaf. The rhythmic beat, soft but precise, was the heartbeat of an idea, a crown without a crown, conceived not for power but for poise. The studio belonged to Jess Collett, one of Britain's most celebrated milliners. It was here, surrounded by rolls of silk, sketches, and wire frames, that the Princess of Wales's coronation headpiece was born. Unlike the secretive vaults of the royal jewels, this was a workshop alive with laughter, teacups, and the hum of creativity. Jess had been personally chosen by Sarah Burton, creative director of Alexander McQueen and longtime designer for Catherine's most significant royal moments, including her 2011 wedding gown. Burton's message was clear. We're not making history. We're making grace visible. Together, they built what would become the most symbolic piece of craftsmanship of the decade. From the start, the brief was radical. No gold, no diamonds, no colored gems. Queen Camilla's coronation crown would already command the cameras, adorned with centuries of jewels and the weight of empire. Catherine's piece, by contrast, was to embody a new kind of regality, one drawn from humility, restraint, and faith in craftsmanship. Jess Collett later described the assignment as both terrifying and liberating. We had to create something that felt royal without being royal, she said. Something that whispered, not shouted. Using silver wire and crystal stones, Collett and her small team of artisans shaped delicate leaves and petals by hand. Each motif was inspired by nature: oak leaves for strength, ivy for loyalty, and myrtle for love. Every line of the design told a story not of conquest, but of connection. The process was painstaking. Each floral form began as a pencil sketch, transferred onto fine fabric and embroidered with genuine silver thread. That embroidery was then cut free, wired, and curved into sculptural, three-dimensional leaves. Royal embroiderer Chloe Savage, who previously worked on both Catherine's and Meghan Markle's wedding gowns, described the challenge with a grin. Silver thread looks like moonlight, but it behaves like a temperamental snake. One wrong touch, and it creases forever. At any moment, a single slip could ruin weeks of work. But the result was breathtaking, a fusion of jewelry and textile art so light it seemed to float above the wearer's head. "It's a crown that breathes," Savage said proudly. "When Catherine moves, it moves with her. It lives." Few knew that the story of the headpiece also carried a quiet circle of gratitude. Decades earlier, a young Jess Collett had received a small loan from Prince Charles's Prince's Trust, the charity that helps creative entrepreneurs start their businesses. Without that support, her millinery studio might never have opened. And so, in 2023, the crown Collett forged in silver became her way of giving back, a tribute to the king's vision and the princess's trust. On the morning of the coronation, she shared a simple message on Instagram. 25 years ago, I borrowed from at Prince Trust to follow my dream. Today, that dream stands in Westminster Abbey. Thank you, Your Majesty. Even the charity's official account responded, "You've become part of our history." It was a perfect royal full-circle grace creating grace. But not all within the palace shared that warmth. Rumors swirled that Queen Camilla's stylists were monitoring every element of Catherine's ensemble, wary of any design that might visually compete with the Queen's own crown. Palace insiders whispered of quiet tension, requests for sketches, reminders about protocol. Jess Collett, ever diplomatic, later laughed off the gossip. "We just made what we were asked to make," she said, and hoped it would make everyone happy. Still, when the final prototype was delivered to Kensington Palace, there was a long silence before approval came through. Some say it was Catherine herself, not an aide, not a stylist, who gave the final nod and said softly, "Yes, this feels right." In a monarchy where jewels have always shouted legacy, Catherine's decision to wear restraint as her crown was quietly revolutionary. Her headpiece represented the craftsmanship of Britain's artisans, the humility of her character, and the respect she held for both the king and the late Queen Elizabeth II. It also reflected a woman confident enough to let others shine even when she could have outshone them all. As one court correspondent later remarked, "Camilla had the crown, Catherine had the moment." And as the coronation drew near, one question echoed through both fashion circles and palace corridors. Could this silver creation, this anti-crown, become the defining symbol of a modern monarchy? The answer would come soon enough, under the chandeliers of Westminster Abbey, where art, history, and quiet defiance would meet. The morning of the 6th of May 2023 dawned gray over London. Westminster stirred under a low, Pewter sky, a fitting canvas for the weight of history about to unfold. Inside the walls of Kensington Palace, there was no panic, no flurry, only quiet concentration. In her private dressing room, Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood before a mirror framed in pale gold. The hum of cameras outside was already building. Yet inside, the atmosphere felt almost sacred. On the table before her lay the headpiece, a gleaming crown of silver leaves and crystal dew, still and silent, as though it too was waiting for its moment. For weeks, speculation had consumed the press. Could she, wear a tiara? Would the Princess of Wales defy the quiet directive that no one but the Queen Consort should wear gemstones that day? When Catherine lifted the silver circlet and placed it gently atop her hair, every doubt evaporated. No diamonds, no gold, no competition, only confidence wrapped in restraint. She turned to her stylist and smiled. "It doesn't need to sparkle," she said softly. "It just needs to mean something." And in that sentence, she crystallized what the new generation of monarchy would stand for. Purpose over pageantry, authenticity over excess. At Buckingham Palace, Queen Camilla prepared for her own debut as crown consort. Her crown, glimmering with historic diamonds, was the very embodiment of power, reclaimed the ultimate symbol of royal restoration. For Camilla, this day was the summit of decades of endurance, and she intended to own it entirely. Yet fate, or perhaps design, had written another narrative thread through the morning, one far subtler, but destined to linger longer in the collective memory. While Camilla's diamonds captured the flash of the cameras, Catherine's silver headpiece captured the emotion of the crowd. The contrast was unmistakable. One woman crowned by tradition, the other elevated by integrity. As one royal commentator put it later, Camilla looked like a queen. Catherine looked like the future. The Princesses Ensemble, designed by Sarah Burton for Alexander McQueen, was an ivory masterpiece embroidered with roses, thistles, daffodils, and shamrocks, representing the four nations of the United Kingdom. Every stitch was a message of unity. Every thread spoke of continuity. Her silver headpiece, woven with motifs of oak leaves and myrtle, shimmered under the soft morning light like a bridge between centuries. If Camilla's crown shouted history, Catherine's whispered eternity. The royal motorcade left Kensington at precisely 9:30 a.m. Crowds along the Mall craned their necks for a glimpse, the Princess of Wales waving gently through the window, her calm smile mirrored by Prince William beside her. There was serenity in her stillness. She seemed utterly unshaken by the magnitude of what awaited. "She radiated peace," said one aide. Like she understood her role wasn't to dominate the day, but to anchor it. When the car door opened at Westminster, the air changed. The sound of trumpets filled the ancient space, and all eyes turned to the Abbey's north entrance. Catherine stepped out, her ivory gown glinting softly, the silver headpiece catching the faintest rays of light that streamed through the stained glass windows. No jewel sparkled brighter that morning, not even Camilla's diamonds, because Catherine's radiance came from something rarer. The confidence of humility, guests whispered as she passed. "She looks like a painting," one foreign ambassador murmured. Another guest noted, "That headpiece, it's not a crown, but somehow, it feels like one." And indeed it did. It framed her face the way light frames a sunrise, soft, inevitable, impossible to ignore. Ironically, by choosing not to compete, Catherine became the highlight. While Camilla's crown represented endurance, Catherine symbolized evolution. The cameras, hungry for spectacle, found poetry instead, and the public, weary of royal excess, found something they could finally believe in. As she took her place beside Prince William, Catherine briefly lowered her eyes, the silver leaves of her headpiece catching the candlelight. In that instant, it was as if she carried the blessing of both monarchs, the one reigning and the one gone before. She didn't wear a crown, one BBC commentator said on air, but she might as well have been crowned all the same. Observers close to the royal box later recalled a fleeting glance between the two women, Camilla and Catherine. It wasn't hostile, merely layered with meaning. Camilla, wrapped in the jewels of empire, met the calm gaze of the woman who had chosen none. In that quiet moment, the narrative shifted forever. The queen may have had the throne, but the princess had the story. What Catherine achieved that morning was subtle but seismic. By surrendering the spotlight, she mastered it. By refusing opulence, she redefined majesty. And as the first chords of Zadok the priest thundered through the abbey, The silver headpiece gleamed like a constellation, a modern emblem of loyalty, legacy, and light. Catherine didn't need diamonds to shine. She was the diamond. There are moments in royal history when symbolism speaks louder than words. When the fabric, the thread, the light of a single jewel, or lack thereof, tells a story more powerful than any proclamation. On the day of King Charles's coronation, Catherine, Princess of Wales, wrote such a story not with speeches, but with silver leaves. To understand Catherine's headpiece, one must travel back 70 years, to the 2nd of June 1953. A young Queen Elizabeth II, just 27, was crowned in the same Westminster Abbey. The world that day shimmered with gold crowns, carriages, and hope after years of post-war austerity. Among the details largely forgotten by history were 6 young maids of honor women who carried the Queen's robe and stood beside her as she took her oath. They wore simple gowns by designer Norman Hartnell, each crowned not with gemstones, but with silver-gold floral circlets, delicate and pure. Those circlets became Catherine's inspiration. Her headpiece, crafted 7 decades later, was not a replica but a rebirth, a bridge of silver threads connecting 2 women separated by time, but united by purpose. We studied those images from 1953. Designer Jess Collett revealed, there was something hauntingly beautiful about them, a kind of innocence. Catherine wanted to bring that back, in her own way. Throughout the design process, Catherine reportedly asked that the embroidery and motifs carry meaning, not merely decoration. She requested oak leaves for strength, ivy for loyalty, and myrtle the flower of marriage, all of which were present in Queen Elizabeth's own wedding bouquet in 1947. Every petal in the headpiece was hand-shaped, every curve a nod to the Queen who had worn duty like a crown for 70 years. Even the choice of silver rather than gold was deeply intentional. Silver tarnishes if left untended, but gleams brightest when cared for, a poetic metaphor for the monarchy itself. Royal insiders later confirmed that the headpiece was referred to privately among the team as the Elizabeth Tribute. Though never announced, everyone involved understood its purpose. It was a love letter in metal and thread, said one palace stylist. A silent thank you from Catherine to the woman who showed her what service means. The bond between the late Queen and the Princess of Wales had always been one of mutual admiration. Elizabeth respected Catherine's steadiness. Catherine revered the Queen's quiet strength. During private audiences in the years before her passing, the Queen was said to have praised Catherine's discipline of composure. And so, when the coronation arrived the first, without Elizabeth's presence, Catherine chose to let her spirit fill the void. She did not wear the Queen's jewels. She wore her values. The silver circlet became a visual echo of the young Queen's promise in 1953. I dedicate my life to your service. Now, 7 decades later, Catherine embodied that same vow, not in words, but in the way her head bowed, her eyes lifted, her crownless grace radiated through the Abbey. As she entered Westminster, some guests reportedly felt a sense of déjà vu. It was as if the ghost of 1953 had returned, said one historian in attendance. The posture, the serenity, everything about her presence mirrored the young Elizabeth. It was uncanny and moving. Even the placement of her headpiece mirrored that of the Queen's coronation tiara, not high and regal, but low and natural, as though she carried it lightly. That detail, experts say, reflected Catherine's deep understanding of symbolism. The crown is not a weight to bear, but a promise to honor. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla's own crown, heavy with diamonds once belonging to Queen Mary, glittered magnificently under the Abbey chandeliers. It was grandeur in its purest form. And yet, beside Catherine's silver circlet, it seemed almost from another age. Camilla's crown represented tradition. One fashion editor observed. Catherine's transformation. There was no competition, only contrast, the visible dialogue of 2 eras coexisting on one stage. Camilla symbolized endurance, Catherine symbolized evolution. And the public, ever attuned to the poetry of appearances, recognized both but felt most deeply for the one who carried remembrance without possession. When the coronation concluded, and the choir's final notes dissolved into the vaulted ceiling, there was a moment of silence. Those who watched closely saw Catherine glance upward toward the Abbey's grand central window. through which light streamed in soft silver tones. In that quiet gesture, many saw a daughter of the monarchy saluting her predecessor. Perhaps she was imagining the queen's familiar smile, her ever-steady gaze. Perhaps she was simply breathing in the gravity of it all. Either way, it was the kind of moment that photographs never quite capture but hearts never forget. Catherine didn't just remember the queen, wrote the Times. She resurrected her. After the ceremony, royal experts agreed that Catherine's headpiece had accomplished something rare. It connected 3 generations of monarchy: Elizabeth, Charles, and the future queen herself through art rather than ceremony. It was both a farewell and a beginning, wrapped into one, a symbol of continuity, humility, and the quiet power of choosing meaning over magnificence. As one court insider put it, smiling, Camilla wore the jewels of the past, Catherine wore the light of the future. And in that light, pure, silver, unwavering, the spirit of Queen Elizabeth II lived on. When the choir's final hymn faded, and the bells of Westminster Abbey thundered across London, the historic coronation of King Charles III had come to an end. But outside the Abbey walls, a new story had already begun, one that would travel faster and further than any royal procession. It was the story of a silver headpiece, and the woman who wore it as if it were made of light itself. Within minutes, photographs of Catherine, Princess of Wales, stepping into the Abbey began circulating across the globe. News outlets expected to focus on Camilla's diamond-laden crown. Yet, it was Catherine's ethereal silhouette that captured the headlines. On social media, her portrait went viral. No jewels, just grace. The crown of a modern queen. Elegance that doesn't compete, it completes. Hashtags like #SilverCrown, #Catherine the Calm, and #Grace Not Gold trended worldwide. Even those who usually avoided royal coverage found themselves sharing the image, drawn by its serenity. It wasn't the dazzle that caught people, it was the discipline. One fashion critic wrote in Vogue, "In a world obsessed with display, Catherine reminded us that true luxury is restraint." The British press wasted no time crafting narratives. The Daily Telegraph called her a masterclass in quiet confidence. The Guardian praised the delicate diplomacy of her choice. Even The Sun, never one for subtlety, splashed the headline, "No crown, no problem. Kate rules anyway." While Queen Camilla's opulent look drew respect, it was Catherine's simplicity that stole affection. The contrast between them became the most discussed element of the day. As one commentator noted, Camilla was the queen of diamonds. Catherine was the queen of hearts. Behind palace gates, however, the tone was more cautious. Courtiers whispered that Camilla had noticed the shift in attention, not with anger, but with a twinge of unease. She had commanded the ceremony, yet Catherine had captured its soul. Outside the Abbey, the crowd's energy was electric. People waved Union Jacks and cheered for the royal carriage. But when Catherine appeared on the balcony of Buckingham Palace later that afternoon, the roar was thunderous. It was as though Britain, weary from scandal, politics, and change, had found in her a reminder of what dignity looked like. "She's hope in human form," one spectator told BBC News. "She reminds us that being royal isn't about the jewels, it's about the example." Across the Atlantic, American networks echoed the same sentiment. "Kate Middleton just redefined royal glamour," declared CNN. Meanwhile, fashion houses from Milan to Tokyo began referencing her look. The silver simplicity trend was born overnight. In the days following the coronation, palace staff described a peculiar atmosphere, celebratory yet cautious. Camilla's advisors, protective of the new queen's image, reportedly urged the press office to balance coverage. But the tide of public admiration was unstoppable. Catherine had unintentionally or perhaps brilliantly reshaped what it meant to be royal in a post-Elizabeth world. Her headpiece, once considered a compromise, had become a manifesto. As one courtier put it, she played the long game, and she won it with silver instead of diamonds. Even King Charles, known for his eye for artistry, was said to be deeply moved. A palace source revealed that he privately praised Catherine's decision, telling her after the event, "Your Grace honored both queens and made this one proud." Designers began calling the headpiece the anti-crown, not in mockery, but in admiration. It stood for everything the modern world wanted from monarchy: restraint, sustainability, intelligence, and emotional truth. Sarah Burton of Alexander McQueen later remarked, "It wasn't about making her look royal. She already is. It was about showing that power can look like kindness. Jess Collett's workshop, once a quiet corner of London craftsmanship, suddenly became a pilgrimage site for young designers. Her inbox overflowed with messages from aspiring artists thanking her for proving that handmade could still mean majestic. The Prince's Trust, which had once given Collett her first small business loan, celebrated the achievement with a post that read, "From dream to dynasty, this is what royal support can build." In the weeks that followed, royal observers coined a new term. The Windsor reset, a shift from grandeur to grace. Where Elizabeth's era had been marked by endurance and Camilla's by restoration, Catherine's now promised refinement. Even her wardrobe choices after the coronation echoed the theme. Muted tones, soft metallics, recycled couture, proof that luxury could coexist with conscience. Her silver headpiece had set not just a style precedent, but an ethical one. Beyond fashion, Catherine's presence reignited public affection for the monarchy. Polls showed her popularity soaring to record levels. Young Britons who had grown distant from royal tradition admitted they saw something real in her. "She's not trying to be a queen," 122-year-old student told The Independent. "She's trying to be a good person, and that's rarer than any crown." As the headlines moved on, the image endured, a princess framed in silver light, her expression serene yet strong. And through her restraint, Catherine had accomplished what even jewels could not. She made the world believe again. In the weeks after the coronation, a new phrase began circulating through the British press and across the marble corridors of Buckingham Palace: the Catherine effect. It wasn't about fashion, though her look had already redefined royal style. It wasn't even about popularity, though her approval ratings had soared to near mythic heights. It was about influence, quiet, graceful, unstoppable, a kind of leadership the monarchy hadn't seen since Queen Elizabeth II herself. Historians would later call the coronation of King Charles III a turning point. It wasn't the ceremony that marked the change, but the atmosphere around it. The British crown, so often weighed down by formality and tradition, suddenly felt human again. And at the center of that transformation stood Catherine, the Princess of Wales, with a silver headpiece that had spoken louder than any speech. She reminded the world that refinement isn't weakness, wrote royal historian Dr. Amelia Rhodes. Her decision to step back from grandeur was the moment the monarchy stepped forward. It was subtle, but seismic. Through restraint, she had rewritten the visual language of royal power, replacing opulence with empathy and tradition with timelessness. Months later, during a small engagement at a children's hospice in Norfolk, Catherine was photographed wearing a simple pair of silver earrings that echoed the same leaf motif as her coronation headpiece. The detail did not go unnoticed. Fans online immediately dubbed it the silver thread, a quiet continuation of her symbolic crown. "She carries that message everywhere she goes," one admirer wrote. "That leadership doesn't shout. It listens." Even royal aides noticed the shift. Where once events were defined by protocol, they now carried an aura of warmth. Catherine's approach, hands-on, patient, sincere, began to influence how the palace presented itself to the public. "She's the monarchy's soft power," said a senior courtier. "Everything she does turns down the volume, but turns up the meaning." Over time, even Queen Camilla came to appreciate the wisdom in Catherine's restraint. According to palace insiders, what began as subtle tension had mellowed into respect. The Queen privately acknowledged that Catherine's image had strengthened the family's legacy in ways jewels never could. Camilla, whose own journey to the throne was long and difficult, reportedly told aides, "There's room for both crowns, one to shine and one to steady the light." It was a rare admission of harmony after months of unspoken rivalry. Together, the two women now represented the monarchy's dual faces. Camilla Endurance, Catherine Evolution. By late summer, opinion pieces across Britain began to echo the same sentiment. Catherine wasn't just the future queen, she was already shaping the philosophy of kingship itself. Her choices from wardrobe to charity work projected the kind of moral authority that transcended title. Where the world once saw the royal family, it now saw a family that belonged to the world. "Her strength is her stillness," wrote The New Yorker. "She reminds us of the best kind of power, the power that doesn't need to prove itself." Catherine's silver headpiece had become more than an artifact. It had become a metaphor. It told a story of grace under scrutiny, of duty carried lightly, of a woman redefining what majesty means in the 21st century. The original headpiece now rests in a velvet-lined case at Kensington Palace, occasionally brought out for private exhibitions of royal craftsmanship. But its legacy lives on in the hands of new designers inspired by its purity. Young artisans have begun embracing the same philosophy, simplicity as strength. Fashion schools across London now teach the Collet method, combining traditional millinery with sustainable materials. Jess Collette herself often credits Catherine for giving artisans a crown moment that changed their industry. She proved that craft and conscience can coexist, Collette told Harper's Bazaar. She gave us back our pride. If Elizabeth's reign was the age of endurance and Charles's is the age of reform, Catherine's emerging influence has already been named by cultural critics the Age of Light. It's an age where transparency, humility, and connection are the new crown jewels, and Catherine, with her silver circlet of leaves, stands as its symbol. At public events, children wave at her not because she's royal, but because she's approachable. Older Britons, once skeptical of the monarchy's relevance, now speak of her with affection usually reserved for the late queen. In her presence, the monarchy feels less like an institution and more like a heartbeat. On the anniversary of the coronation, Catherine was asked by a journalist whether she had kept the headpiece. She smiled that familiar, unflappable smile and replied, "It's not mine. It belongs to everyone who believes in grace." Those words, like the crown itself, captured her essence: grounded, luminous, generous. She didn't need diamonds to prove her worth, nor power to validate her influence. Her true crown was invisible, woven of faith, empathy, and light. And as Britain continues to look forward, balancing heritage with hope, it's clear that the monarchy's brightest era may not be measured in gold at all, but in the silver light of Catherine's example, a glow that will outlast the crowns of kings and the reigns of time itself. She taught us, wrote one columnist in the Times, that when history finally closes its eyes on this century, it won't remember what she wore, it will remember how she made the world feel.